the topic of our presentation is embracing uncertainty and pivoting towards success in college admissions. And I think that's a really important thing, particularly during the last 2 years, because that's all we've been doing in everything, college and otherwise. So let's move on. Let's make sure this works. Okay. So let's talk about what we're gonna talk about. So first of all, times have changed. So times have changed from when you as parents applied to school, and times have also changed since COVID. COVID was really a catalyst to changing the admissions landscape. Some of the things that we're seeing is that character is continuing to count even more. It's always been an important part of the application process, but now even more so. And we're also seeing students move from a well-rounded to an angular student. One of the ways that we can really manage all of this uncertainty and change is to figure out what are your strengths as students and what are the ways that you can contribute and play to those strengths. And hopefully you'll find some steps that you can take to follow this process, make it easier and more enjoyable. So let's talk about what's changed. So Stefanie, you want to take us on that and give us a little bit of a broad brush strokes on that?
Sure, thanks, Lisa. So testing is in flux. What does that mean? So you're hearing, I'm sure, the phrase test optional, test optional. So schools, most colleges became test optional, meaning it is your choice if you want to send in the SAT or ACT scores, because during COVID, a lot of people were unable to take the tests. So most colleges remain test optional for the class of 2023, and many continue to remain test optional for the next 2 to 3 years. The UCs, the University of California schools, they're even going test blind for the next 3 years, meaning they're not even going to look at tests. Only 48% of Common App applicants submitted test scores in 2022. So that's 50%. So half of students applying to college are not sending in test scores, or sending in test scores, however you look at it. So the impact, and we're going to get into this in a little bit later, the impact of not submitting test scores, it depends on the school and the applicant. So you have to be strategic. Some schools say they're test optional and they're truly test optional. Some schools say they're test optional, but they really want to see those test scores. SATs are also moving to shorter adaptive digital format that's starting with current freshmen. So you'll be able to take these tests on a laptop, on a computer. And then finally, even more emphasis is going to be put on the transcript, on the grades and letters of recommendation, because if you don't have the SATs or ACTs to corroborate the grades, what else can they look at? So again, these recommendations from your teachers and the transcripts are going to carry more weight than ever without the test scores. So here's a really quick chart, so a nice visual to kind of show you the impact of schools going test optional and which schools are truly test optional and which schools are looking for those test scores. And this is just a sample size, and this is from the class of 2021. So if you look at Northeastern, and they're very generous in their early acceptance rates. So they accept about 50% of their class early. About a little over 50% anyway, so half were accepted with test scores and half were accepted without scores. So there's really no difference. Vanderbilt, even though it's a very low acceptance rate, it's the same thing. There's not a huge discrepancy. Same with Swarthmore, but some schools, University of Georgia, UVA, there's a huge discrepancy. Emory, Colgate, Georgia Tech, all in the favor of students who submitted test scores. So Lisa's going to talk about, well, what does this all mean?
Yeah, and the one thing to keep in mind about the Southern public, so a lot of the testing is for the public schools are driven by a board of regents. And so, for example, Georgia Tech and University of Georgia, I've had we've been on webinars with both admissions people from those schools. Georgia requires testing. You cannot get admitted to a Georgia school if you don't submit testing. 2021, it was different because some kids couldn't take it. But now you actually have to submit them. But each one of the admissions people said that even though you have to submit them, it carries very little weight in terms of the overall holistic way that they look at applications. Whereas a school like Georgetown and MIT, they absolutely want to see test scores. So what does it mean? We're not trying to scare you or trying to make you, get freaked out even more, but it sort of creates the environment that we're in, and this is what creates the uncertainty. So for the most selective schools, so those are schools that are less than 50% acceptance rate, and these numbers just came out today in a study, so it was good timing for our presentation. They saw a 25% increase, between year over year in applications. What drove the increase? Test optional drove the increase, because people are like, hey, I don't need to submit testing, so I'm going to submit these schools that I never would have thought of before. The other thing that really was actually a benefit of COVID on one hand, and then made it more competitive on another hand, was that there's been a lot more access, because the colleges pivoted and they turned on a dime, because they had to find ways to make people aware of their schools. And so they created all of these online and virtual visits, virtual information sessions. And so that really increased access to so many students that wouldn't have had the ability to go and visit those schools before and really know about them. So that made more people apply to more schools. And then what happens? Well, more people are applying to more schools, more students are feeling uncertain. And so guess what? I'm going to apply to more schools. And so then it creates this cycle of just, creating more schools, because you're like, I don't know if I'm going to get into this school, so I have to apply to more schools. And then the last piece, that's the external factor, is that you're going to hear this. Well, I don't know if you'll hear it a lot, but we hear it a lot when we talk to admissions people, is the yieldability of admitted applicants. Colleges are businesses, and just like everything is big data, so are college admissions. They're trying to understand, what is the probability if I accept this student from this particular school with this profile, that they're going to actually yield that student, and that means they're going to matriculate. And so they have very sophisticated modeling that can show that certain students with a certain profile are never going to come to a school that they're considering their safety. And so that's why it makes it so much more difficult, and that's what builds the uncertainty. So what do you do? So first of all, I don't want you to freak out. That's not the point. I want you to instead think about it and realize that the external factors are always going to be there, one way or another. And so there's not really anything you could do about the external factors. But what you can do is you could start to understand what your unique angle is. And I hope that there's some students here. I can't really see everyone who's in the audience, but I hope there's some students listening. Or maybe they'll listen later. We are recording this, but they want to create a community of unique students that are going to impact their communities. And so that's really what you want to think about for high school as you plan your time, as you plan your classes, as you do activities outside of school, is what is it that really speaks to you as a student, and how will you impact your community? And that's the way to think about this. So we have the college application wheel, and anyone who's seen one of our presentations before know that we always use this as a framework, because colleges are looking to create students in all of these different areas that are going to contribute in different ways. So we're going to go through each of the different pieces of the wheel, and I've sent everybody, you should have received a copy of the application wheel. If you haven't, put it in the chat box, and Stefanie will upload it and put a copy of the PDF in the chat box. And I'm hoping that as we go through this, you'll be able to follow along and start mapping out where you see your strengths are. Okay, so the first piece of the pie, or the piece of the wheel, is your academics and to some or lesser or greater degree test scores. This is the question that every college is going to ask for a student, whether or not they're admissible, is can they do the work? Can they be successful in our environment? And can they add to some degree to the academic enrichment of the community? So in the past, it used to be about 2/3 academics and a 1/3 test scores. With the advent of some students not having test scores, then it becomes a matter of how else can I determine if this student is going to be academically successful in our school? So one of the ways they're going to look at it is your grades, obviously. They're going to look at your academic rigor. And they're going to look at everything, whatever school you're at, within the context of the school that you're coming from. And that's really the most important thing. So from Westfield High School, they're going to compare you to other students in Westfield High School. If you're at a different high school, they're going to compare you to other students in your high school. And the question that they really want to understand is, are you working to your full capacity? Are you challenging yourself enough? Or are you challenging yourself too much? We know that it's been very hard for many students to go from hybrid or online education to being in school full time. And we've heard that it's been challenging, especially if you're jumping into those more academic classes. And so this is really the first semester that you've done this. Now you're moving into the second semester. So it's really, as you start planning your classes, these are the things that you want to think about, is how much am I challenging myself? What are the ways that I need to either change my study habits or go in for extra help, or, you know, whatever you need to do to get to a point where you can be managing your time and do the work that you didn't really have a chance to step up into. You just kind of got thrown into it, particularly those of you who are sophomores and juniors, and even the freshmen to some degree. So those are the things to consider. The other thing is, should I take the SAT or ACT? That's now a really valid question. If you're a really strong student and you're not sure what's going to happen with testing, and like if you're a junior and you know that all of your schools are test optional, should you spend all of your time focusing on the SAT or the ACT, or should you put that energy into getting better grades? So obviously, if you could do both, you should do both. But if you had to choose one, then your grades are going to be the most important side of it. But if you do have really strong test scores and they match your grades, then those would be areas where you would want to submit your test scores as well. And so it's very individual for each student. The next thing is extracurricular activities. So once the college has made the determination that, yeah, you know, this student is admissible, we think this person could do the work and would be successful, then they want to look at, okay, what are you going to do for our school? What are the ways that you're engaging in your community? What have you done, you know, over time? And keeping in mind that we know that for, you know, the last 2 years, it was hard to do things. And we're going to show you some examples of how students were able to still pivot even during COVID. But now it's great. I mean, masks are coming off March 7th. You know, there's opportunities for you to start really getting involved in extracurricular activities. And we recommend that you do things that you really enjoy or that you feel are creating value for yourself or others. And you dive deep into one or two areas rather than trying to do a lot of things all at once, because then you'll have much more to talk about when you talk about those activities. Leadership.
So leadership, I think when we hear the word leadership, we assume that you have to be the president of a certain club or that you have to be the captain of the sports team. And yes, while that's true, there are other ways to be a leader. So we encourage you to look everywhere for opportunities to lead. For example, a lot of students' families' responsibilities changed during COVID. They were very overwhelmed and people were working from home. So siblings or children, they had to step up in different ways. That's a great example of how you pivoted and were a leader during COVID. You're a manager at a part-time job. You're a captain at on a sports team, standing up for something which you believe. You're an advocate. That's a wonderful way of showing your leadership capabilities. You mentor, you help others. So again, just a reminder that a lot of times when you're leading, it's right, usually the humble people that are not talking about these amazing accomplishments that they have, that there are other ways to be seen as a leader throughout this application process. And then there's intellectual curiosity. What does that mean? Intellectual curiosity is learning for the sake of learning. So learning about something that you're really excited about, and you're not just learning about, you're not studying through your bio textbook just to get an A on the text the next day. And you know, maybe you are someone who loves biology and that's your passion, and you read every blog and video and social media account about biology. But for some, it might be you love writing stories and articles and blogs. Maybe it could be you attend a pre-college summer program, create websites, research projects, involvement in the arts, academic related clubs. You're an avid reader. I worked with a student who wants to be a psychologist, and he's really passionate about mental health and being an advocate for mental health for a lot of different reasons. So he started his own podcast with a very clever name about life sucking. And he wanted this for his peers. He wanted an outlet where he could reach people his own age. So there are a lot of different opportunities to show your intellectual curiosity, again, which is something that will be highlighted in the case studies, which Lisa is going to share soon.
All right, good segue. So now I'm gonna show you a case study, and I am gonna show you Noah, and we're gonna walk through 5 different case studies that we hope will illustrate how students pivoted and sort of pivoted towards success, and also how they thought about using the wheel to their advantage. So let's talk about Noah. Now you're gonna look at Noah and you're gonna be like, oh my God, this is a crazy. This kid has done so much academically. So I don't want anyone to get intimidated. I just want you to understand kind of how the process works and see his journey. So Noah he took all honors AP classes. At his high school, even the arts classes are honors. So that's why he has so many, which you wouldn't be able to get at Westfield. So just keep that in mind. He was in the top 5% of his school. He got a 36 on his ACT. He won the Penn Book Award. He was a National Merit semifinalist. He was an AP Scholar with distinction, which means that he got 5s on 6 of his AP exams, and he's going to take 12 total. So really smart kid. There's no one in any school that would say Noah can't do the work, right? Noah can do the work. Really smart kid. Community service, leadership. He was the president of the Friendship Circle, which is an organization that works with kids or even young adults with disabilities. He continued to meet with a special needs student over Zoom. He knew how important that was. He started doing this back in middle school, and he knew it was a really important thing, both for him and for this student or this young man that he was seeing every week. And he didn't want to let it go. So he was able to change and do it over Zoom. He was also a counselor, a CIT, and a camper at Camp Vermont, and he created the Color War events. I'm going to get back to that in a minute, why I put that on there. Athletics. He was an athlete. He was JV soccer captain. He played club soccer. He was played ultimate and rec basketball. So very into sports, but not going to be a recruited athlete, but still liked it. His biggest piece of the wheel was his intellectual curiosity. He had a really strong interest in science and applied math, not pre-med, not engineering, but really straight science. In particular, he really liked neuroscience. And so this is where we started making connections. He got interested in neuroscience and the brain based on working with a student who had autism, trying to understand how does it break down in the brain? What are the things that are different about someone, an autistic person versus someone who is neurotypical? So that's the first thing he started getting interested in. He was part of the Israel engagement. He was an Israel engagement fellow who was supposed to go to Israel in the summer of 2021, and that got canceled. So he instead decided he would become a research fellow through the Summer STEM Institute, something that we found that was kind of new, but it was very intense. He learned how to do research, he learned how to do modeling, and it was something that was interesting to him. But it was a lot of work over the summer, but he was very persistent and wanted to do that. He loves board games and fantasy football. So he had spent a lot of time playing Settlers of Catan, having a fantasy football league. I know a lot of kids have fantasy football leagues, but he was really into the statistics and analyzing the players and putting the perfect team together. He was interested in science and statistics and how systems work. And that systems thinking is really what ended up being a big part of who he was and how his brain worked. He was part of the math and science leagues and the US Biology Olympiad. And he also liked to create digital art. So you see Noah, it's like you think, wow, Noah's amazing. And he is. He's also a really nice young man. So if we go back to the counselor part, normally I would say, do we really want to write about color war at camp? Because, you think, wow, like a lot of kids do that. Is it that unusual? But as he was talking to me and explaining to me why this was so fun for him, was because it was the first year that the counselors were put in charge of creating all of the activities for color war. They had a budget, and they had to come up with all the different games and activities. And he loved color war as a kid. What kid doesn't like it? So he put together over the summer a 10-page Google spreadsheet where he was calculating all of the different pieces of this color war, the activities, the rubber duckies. We were laughing, we called him Rubber Ducky Kid. All the different ways that he wanted to have like the ducky to camper ratio as they were going through the process. So he had meticulously planned it, and he's a huge planner. That's the way he thinks. He's always thinking things throughout and planning things. So he got everything ready. He was all ready to go. He blew his whistle. The campers came in and they started going through and doing all the events. And then guess what? Well, campers don't follow the rules that he had nicely mapped out in his Excel spreadsheet. They started, pulling things up. They started not following any of the rules. They were all cheating. He didn't anticipate that. He wasn't expecting that to happen. So all of a sudden his mind was recalculating, okay, I have to come up with a way to calculate how I'm going to judge each of these teams on the different point system, because it's different than what I had originally thought. So again, he had to pivot. He had to think through all the different ways. So -1 point for this infraction, +3 for that. And then he quickly was calculating it. So as he was describing that for me, I just thought it was the perfect example of how his mind works. And so it's not so much what you talk about, but it's how you talk about it and how you help admissions understand the way that your mind works. And that was something that was really critical for Noah. So for Noah, he really was interested in highly select colleges with strong academics and sports. When his Israel trip got canceled, he shifted and did the online STEM program. He really wanted to incorporate his interest in board games, science, statistics, strategy, and systems thinking into his application. So we found ways that we could do that. We wanted to show his character and leadership through describing his interactions at the friendship circle. And he loved University of Pennsylvania. So that was his first choice school. All right. So this was his list of schools, and he was going to apply to University of Pennsylvania early decision. So I'm going to do another poll. Oh, sorry, I was still sharing that poll. And I want you to guess, what do you think happened to Noah? So here are our choices for what do you think happened to Noah for early decision to Penn. All right, so I think we have a pretty good thing here. So I'm going to end the poll. I'm going to show the results. So 36% of you thought that he was accepted, 9% thought he was denied, and 55% thought he was deferred. So the deferrals have it. That is what happened. He got deferred, and last year was the year of deferrals. So he was going into December 15th with a deferral. He applied early to Tulane thinking that was a safety school. Well, guess what? He got deferred from Tulane too, because Tulane doesn't want to be anyone's safety school anymore. He also got deferred from University of Michigan. So going into December 15th, he is deferred and he's got into Rutgers. So far he's gotten into Rutgers. And he had applied early action to University of Virginia. So the way the cycle works when you do the early schools, that last year you would find out for Michigan before, but now Michigan's is in January. But in any event, he got deferred. So Noah's feeling not so good. And I'm feeling like, okay, this is going to be a long cycle. We have to stick with this. So then we get to the regular decision. And this is the day before Ivy Day. I should have also said that he is he's a legacy at Cornell, but he didn't want to do Cornell early decision because he wanted to go to Penn. So this is the day before Ivy Day, and most of the Ivies come out at the same day. And he got into University of Virginia back in January. He was happy about it, but he wasn't thrilled because he didn't think it was as good a fit socially for him. His brother had applied early decision to WashU and got in. So he got into WashU and he was happy about WashU, but he really wanted a big sports school, and WashU is not a big sports school. So going into that day, he has a deferral at Penn that he hasn't heard from. He's waitlisted at Duke, waitlisted at Georgetown, denied Northwestern, waitlisted at Vanderbilt, waitlisted at Rice, Michigan, and Tulane. So Noah is freaking out, and I'm kind of freaking out too. But I know in my heart of hearts that, this doesn't make any sense. I'm like, I can't imagine a kid as strong as Noah is not going to get into one of those schools. But I also knew that last year was a year of a lot of uncertainty and a lot of wait lists, and that's what we were seeing. All right, so does anyone want to guess what happened? Anyone want to guess what happened with Noah? What do you think? Anyone want to shout it out? Can't hear you. All right, it's hard to do on Zoom. You have to unmute someone. All right, you could put it in the chat if you want to see what you think what happened. You could put it in the chat and see what happened there. I'm going to close up the chat. All right. So basically what happens is the next day, he's very unhappy one day. And the next day, this is what happens. He gets into Brown, he gets into Penn, and he gets into Cornell. So now he's happy and I'm happy and I'm relieved and everyone's happy. And so then it just goes to show you that it was a longer cycle than he had anticipated. And he had a lot of, even though he's a numbers guy and he understood the yieldability, that's really what happened for him. It was all about yield. And so fortunately, ultimately, it ended up working in his favor. And I just say that I wanted to show this case because I want, if this happens to another student, I want you to understand that it really does work out in the end, and try not to get too stressed out if you are deferred or waitlisted for a number of schools. And he enrolled at Penn. So I want you to just take a minute. You should all have the wheel, and I want you to just think about what your wheel looks like. And if there's any questions along the way, please put them in the chat. It's hard when I'm doing this to see everything, but Stefanie will be looking at the chat and will ask any questions. So please do ask any questions along the way. Okay. Let's talk about other in character.
All right. So this other piece of the wheel is the other character, and some things may not fit neatly into your application. So character, which Lisa will get into in the next slide, has never been more important to the college application process, but also something hard to measure. So character, personal qualities like kindness, empathy, compassion, resiliency, and grit, and how this is going to be shown in the college community and the communities you're a part of is vital to the application process. Non-cognitive factors, so things, again, that are difficult to measure. Legacy, which has changed a lot, especially recently. It's losing its power. First generation, low income, underrepresented minority, geographic diversity, meaning if you live in New Jersey and you want to go to a school in North Dakota versus a school in the Northeast, you might be a little luckier getting into that school in North Dakota versus the Northeast. And then interest in a field that is typically popular with opposite gender. For example, I'm working with a male dancer right now, and dance, if you look at the majority of the people in dance programs, they're usually female. So that's something that is helping him as he's going through the application process.
Great. And I'm going to give you the slide. Before I talk about character, you can look at this. Someone asked a question about what does deferral mean? And I'm sorry if I'm using terms that not everyone understands. So if you're deferred, that means that you've applied early to a school and they've deferred you to the regular decision pool. So they've just decided that they're not going to make a decision until they look at all the regular decision applications, which is different than waitlisting. If you're waitlisted, that means that typically comes after you've applied regular decision, and then they're going to waitlist you. And if there are any spots available, then you might get in off the waitlist, but there's no guarantees. So that's the difference between waitlist and deferral. So thank you for asking that question. All right, so let's talk about character. Colleges are being, college admissions people are being trained on how to assess character, because character can mean different things to different people. And this is coming from the character compass, which is something that came out of the Harvard University. And so there's two ways to think about character. So there's the academic and the intellectual side. So those are the things that we had talked about earlier. So curiosity, wonder, thoroughness, open-mindedness, rigor, intellectual rigor. And then there's the performance side. And those are the qualities that you achieve that you need to keep moving forward. So your perseverance, your ingenuity, your grit. And these often come from academics, but also they come from sports or arts or anything that you have to put a lot of energy into reaching your goal. And I would say that the last 2 years has really been a testament to performance. We've all had to work a lot harder to keep moving forward. The other side of it is the personal side. So the moral side is, are you a good neighbor? Are you trustworthy? Are you kind? Are you compassionate? That's really trying to gauge what type of a roommate are you going to be? What type of a community member will you be? And then the civic side is, are you a good citizen? Are you tolerant? Are you respectful? Are you, do you have community mindedness? So the way that those colleges signal what type of character is most important to them is really based on the questions that they ask in the supplements. So every school has the opportunity to, on the Common App, they will have a main called a personal statement, which is the main essay. And then they have supplements. And each of the supplements will be anything from, how did you get interested in your major and how will you explore that in our college, to describe a time where you've created an inclusive and respectful community. So one school cares about the intellectual character and the others cares more about the civic. So those are ways that you can understand what's important to each of the schools. And those really do come out in your essays and through the letters of recommendation. So let's look at Bronwyn. I call Bronwyn the compassionate, creative, quiet leader. Bronwyn was a strong student. She had a 3.85 out of 4 in an unweighted GPA. She had a number of AP honors classes. Her test scores were not as strong as her academics, and she went to a private girls' Catholic school. She had a special talent. She used video editing, and she created a campaign to help her get on the executive board of her school. Her character and her service were the two biggest parts of her wheel. She began high school feeling really insecure. She wasn't as comfortable in her own skin. But what she realized is the more she focused on helping others, the more confident she became. And so that was something that was really true to who she was. And when COVID canceled her summer plans, which was to go on a mission trip, she ended up instead volunteering at St. Joseph's and helping out and serving food to people that were either home insecure or food insecure. She also, COVID worked to her advantage, actually in a number of ways, because when she was, not auditioning, but when she was trying to become or applying to become on the executive board, usually her school would have you go before the school and give a speech, and that wasn't really in her comfort zone. But that year, instead, they switched to a video, and so that was great for her because she liked to edit videos, and so she was able to make it really fun, and it kind of showcased her leadership and humor. And then she had a lot of community service. She was on the executive board, she was a Girl Scout, she volunteered at St. Joseph's, she was a peer facilitator, a peer minister, and she worked at her church camp. So this is what we ended up doing for Bronwyn. She wanted to identify schools with initially strong pre-health or business. Pre-pandemic, she was going to volunteer, and then she again had to pivot and volunteer at the food bank. But what that did for her is it really gave her an insight into food insecurity, and it made her a much more confident leader. And it had her interest shift from pre-health to business. She also focused it on colleges with a strong commitment to service with strong business programs. And she wanted to apply early decision to BC, and this was going to be test optional. And this is where that really helped her because her testing was not as strong. And this was the first year that BC was test optional. So it worked to her advantage. And Bronwyn, this was her list of schools. So we had BC and Villanova as reaches, and then her possible schools are Bucknell, Lehigh, and University of Richmond. Likely was Providence, and then she had Legacy at Marist. So that was her safety school. And she was accepted early decision to Boston College, and she's there now, and she's really happy and doing a great job there. So that was a good outcome for her. Let's talk about athletics. The first thing you want to do with athletics is try to understand if it's going to be a big piece of your wheel. And if it is, that means it's usually going to be where you're going to be a recruited athlete. And so if you're doing a lot of sport, one of the ways to think about it is, can you be a recruited athlete? Do you want to be a recruited athlete? And if so, at what level do you want to be an athlete? Division I, Division II, or Division III. And then you also need to plan for injuries, because it's always good to go to a school where you would be happy if you still couldn't play your sport. So that's something to consider. So let's look at Jocelyn Jingyi. She's a bilingual musical pre-med fencer. So Jocelyn was 4.0 out of a 5 scale. Her high school had a larger scale. So that put her in the top 30% of her high school. And the reason I'm saying what percentage it is, because typically colleges will look at, top 10%, top 25%, and top 50% when they're breaking down into categories of where students get accepted. She had a lot of rigor. So she took a lot of rigor and 17 AP honors classes, and she had a 34 ACT. So strong test scores. This was an instance where her test scores were stronger than her academics. Intellectually, from the intellectual curiosity standpoint, she was interested in pre-med. Her father was a doctor, so they often would talk about diagnoses at the dinner table. She was also interested in French and became fluent in French because her dad's family was French. One side of her dad's family spoke French. She was planning to be a recruited D3 fencer. She did épée. she was a captain of her high school fencing team. And so during COVID, she wasn't able to train anymore. So she also pivoted by creating a series of workouts, videos that helped train other people to stay fit during the pandemic. So she was creating all of these different videos of training using household items and then putting them up on YouTube and trying to get other people who were wanted to do fencing to train for that, or really just any other athletes. And she competed in numerous tournaments along the East Coast, and she was nationally ranked. So she was able to compete in the tournaments before before COVID, which was great. So she had a good record because she was able to get nationally ranked. The other thing that was important to note about her is that during her sophomore year, she made the decision that I want to be a recruited athlete. She was also a very talented pianist. She played the piano very well, and she was trying to do both. She was trying to, be a really talented piano player as well as a talented fencer, and she had reached a plateau in both, and so she wasn't really moving forward. So she kind of had an epiphany that I need to figure out which hand I'm going to go for. And that's what she wrote her essay about. Like, one hand is playing piano, one hand is doing fencing. And she decided that she was going to go outside of her normal area and go to Baltimore to do a fencing tournament. And that was a pivotal decision for her because that got her back into the fencing mode. And she realized that's what she really wanted to do. And that's really was the big part of her application. So this was our list. This was our strategy, was to identify select colleges with strong pre-med. And initially we thought D1, D3, but it ended up being D3. She reached out to the coaches. She communicated with them ongoing. She was able to attend some summer showcases pre-pandemic. And I think you'll still be able to do that this summer as well. And then she continued to train, and she was able to get a pre-read and admissions and the coaches support. So her strategy was to apply ED to NYU. Usually, if you have the support of the coach and you've gotten a pre-read from admissions, I mean, nothing's a guarantee, but it's usually a pretty good chance that you're going to get in. And that's what she had. And this was our backup list. And again, they were based on fencing. And some of those reaches were will reaches, and we knew that. And fortunately, she got in early decision to NYU. The year that applications went up to 100,000, and she got in, and I was so thrilled that she got in early decision for that. Okay. And then she just ended up withdrawing the rest. She also got into Rutgers. Okay. Financial. Many schools will meet full demonstrated need. And just to go over this, it's important that you understand what's now called the Student Aid Index. And that's really from a need-based perspective, what does the college consider your family's ability to pay? And so I always tell families that you want to understand, will you qualify for need-based aid? And if you won't qualify for need-based aid, then what is your budget for school? And can you get some merit aid? And if you're a full pay student, and then you have, if you're lucky enough to be a full paid student, then you have some flexibility in some of the schools to where you apply. But it's important to know that going in, to know what the budget is as a family, so that you can make those decisions. And if you do qualify for need-based aid, then you want to target schools that meet full need, because those are the schools actually that will be less money than the schools that don't. Special talents. Steph, you want to talk about that?
Sure. So if we look at special talents, which special talents have you developed and employed over the years? Are you a dancer? Do you love music? Do you play a specific instrument? What about visual art? Are you a painter, photographer? Are you a published writer? Or maybe it's you really have an affinity for a specific foreign language, computer coding, theater, film, you love debate. Maybe you're a world-class magician or juggler, or just something really unique about you and this talent that you've developed and are passionate about over the years. So we're going to talk about a student now and how she really used her special talents in the application process. So we call Sophie the resilient baking entrepreneur. And Sophie's really special and interesting for many reasons, which we'll get to. I want to touch first on academics and test scores. So she has a 3.58 unweighted GPA out of a 4.0, which puts her in the top 50% of her class. Her school offers plenty of APs, but she did not take any. She has 4 honors courses. She has a few C's sprinkled into her transcript. She's part of the Music Honor Society. We'll talk about her music talents in a little bit. But something that's unique is her school does offer dual enrollment opportunities. So she has 2 dual enrollment courses, which means she took them with local colleges. And she also applied test optional. She did not take an ACT one. She did not take an SAT one. She knew that it wasn't a strength and she was very confident in that. So she did not send in any test scores and did not take any tests. And then I want to talk about her community service and character. So I'll start with her community service with Best Buddies. So Best Buddies is a nationwide organization where you help students with special needs. And she was not, and she will not be the president of this club or hold a position, but she is a sought after, revered member. She is the student that gets paired with students that might be more difficult to access. When people need advice, people go to her because she just has this natural gift. And part of the reason why she has this natural gift with children with learning differences is because she comes from a family, a very loving and tight-knit family, but she comes from a family where she has immediate family members and siblings specifically who have mental health struggles, learning challenges, and developmental disorders. So this is another way we kind of talked about how to be a leader during COVID. Her responsibilities as a family member went from this to this. And especially with her younger brother, she really became a second mother. She became a caretaker in many ways. And she also overcame a lot of adversity of her own that she was suffering from some mental health issues during COVID too, as so many people were. Something else really interesting to note about Sophie is that her school had a hybrid model like so many other high schools. So she was in school one day and she was learning from home the other days. But because her home at her house, it was so difficult to learn. Again, this very loving, close-knit family, but there was stuff going on at the home that made it impossible for her to focus, out of her control. It was really affecting her schoolwork. She tried to go to local cafes and Panera and parking lots with her hotspot to do the work, and it wasn't working. So she was proactive. She reached out to her assistant principal and she's like, what can we do to help give me a learning environment where I can access my education better? And the assistant principal also knew some family stuff. She has a sister also in the high school. And the assistant principal and the school worked together and they gave her a spot in school where she could do her virtual learning from the school on the days where she wasn't in the classroom. And as a result, her confidence soared. She began flourishing. Her mental health improved. And so that's a nice example of how she pivoted in a situation where, so many things were out of control, but she realized how to get control of that. Also shows her amazing character, her resilience, her flexibility. And then special talent. So what you see is a huge part of the application wheel for her. So she is the marching band leader for the piccolos and the flute section. Her marching band is revered. They're invited to perform overseas and they go to Disney World and they perform at the Thanksgiving Day parade. So a huge honor, not only to even make this band, but to be a leader in this band. She's also a self-taught guitarist, and she sings and she performs at community events. And she just really has a passion for music. And again, because of this passion and because it's something that she loves, she rose to be this leader. It just was very organic and natural. But the real thing we highlighted was her baking. She loves baking. She is a gifted baker. At one point in the beginning of COVID, she juggled, not struggled, but I'm sure she struggled too. She juggled 3 jobs. One was at a very famous ice cream place where she was the head cake decorator. She also started her own business, has a huge entrepreneurial spirit, and she makes money with the business, but also she just loves gift giving. She loves giving treats to people because it makes her happy. And then she reached out to the top rated bakery in her state, which was nearby. He won Food Network challenges, and she just reached out and was like, I want to work for you. And he said, okay. And we call it an apprenticeship because she's learning so much, because these people are true artists, but it's really, she does get paid. So it is a job. And we highlighted this in her supplemental essays and her personal statement. We really wanted to highlight her character and her family relationships. So we spoke about that in the essay. She wanted a baking and entrepreneurship program, which is really difficult because she didn't want a culinary school. That's not what she wanted. And there's not many schools, maybe one school, which we'll talk about, that has this joint program where she could do baking and entrepreneurship. So she was open to applying to business schools because she wanted that entrepreneurship program. She did not want to commit to an EB school for two reasons. One, she put so much work into her applications, but two, her dream school is actually a safety school for her, has a very high acceptance rate, which I'll get to. It was nearly impossible for her to focus on virtual learning because of factors outside of her control. So we wanted to talk about how she was proactive in finding a solution for alternative learning environments. And again, we really wanted to highlight her passion for baking, especially her work ethic, her initiative, her family responsibilities, and that it's a pure passion project. Her reaches: Boston College, her mom went there. It's a legacy, why not? Northeastern, the business school. Babson is a school famous for its entrepreneurship program. Possible Marist American, she liked the business schools there. The same with her likely schools: Drexel, UVM, University of Vermont, University of Massachusetts, College of Charleston, University of Rhode Island, all have business programs. Her safeties are Johnson and Wales and University of New Hampshire. Johnson and Wales is her dream school. That's where she wants to go. That's where she wanted to go because they have, again, this joint entrepreneurship and baking program. So she's still waiting to decide, even though she's pretty sure that she wants to go to Johnson and Wales, which is her dream school. And again, we knew she was going to get in. We felt pretty good. But what we didn't know is they really wanted that merit aid. They wanted a scholarship. So it was really great. I have a video of when she was accepted. So they were so excited when she got into Johnson and Wales. But when they saw the generous scholarship, it was mayhem. I think she sent me the phrase was "welcome to the crazy," because it was incredible to see. So even though she's still waiting on Boston College and American, again, her heart's really at Johnson and Wales. She got into Marist with a really nice scholarship. Drexel and University of Vermont, she got deferred to regular decision. She applied early action there, got into UMass, the business school, and College of Charleston. She got a nice scholarship to University of Rhode Island. We spoke about Johnson and Wales, and she also got into University of New Hampshire.
So one of the questions was, since colleges look at where the students stand in the high school they attend, top of the percentage of the school, does this mean that a student who is at top 5% from Westfield stand a higher chance compared to a student who is at the top 50% from a magnet school accepted by the same college? So that's a good question. And I think it depends. So the magnet school, which I'm assuming you're talking about the magnet school in Union County, that has a set point to get in. There's already a level to get into that school. But I would say that a student from Westfield who is at the top 5% would probably have a better chance than someone who's in the top 50% of the magnet school, because they're looking at you within the context of your high school and other students in that school and what's available to you. But because the magnet school is relatively small, there's not as many students, the statistical significance of being in the top 50% versus the top, say, 40 or 30% is a little bit less. So it really depends on the school. But I will say that yes, that would probably be the answer, that it would be stronger to be the top 5% of Westfield than to be the top 50% of a magnet school. there was a lot of grade inflation last year. So in that regard, they didn't have to go easier because the grades were already easier. But what we are seeing, we're not going to know that until this junior year class. So the class of 2023 applies, and then we'll see what happens, because that, I would say, is the class that's most impacted by going into school and it full tilt. You know, the seniors have already applied and been done, so I can't answer that question. Someone says another case study. I don't know how to see if is there, can you like raise your hand if you want another case study on the little dial thing, and then I will do another one.
I'll try counting for you, Lisa.
Okay, try counting.
I see a lot of thumbs up coming up.
Okay, let me do the final case study then. I will do it. Okay, I just wanted to be mindful of everybody's time. So let's move on to this final case study. Okay, so this is Arun. And Arun, I call him the compassionate musical autism advocate. So Arun is the top 10% of his high school class at a competitive high school. He has 15 AP honors classes and 34 ACTs, so strong academics. He is devoted to his older autistic brother. He spent hours with him during COVID, and really his whole life has been informed by having his older brother in his life and really doing everything he can for him. He had founded an organization called Help Autism India, because the last time he was in India, before COVID, he saw that the level of education just wasn't the same as it was what his brother was getting in the United States. So he was able to raise $20,000 to provide support for families with autism. He was also a talented musician, and he was doing in an a cappella group, and he was going to do a concert, a cappella for autism. And that was right before COVID, right before the shutdown. And so I was asking him about it, and he said, oh yeah, it got shut down. We weren't able to do it. And I said, well, why don't you just do it online? Why don't you see if you could, get other high schools to do a recording? And I mean, I see all these things going online, see if you could do that. As a sophomore, his response was, well, I'm not an officer in the club. I'm not an officer. I'm not a captain. I don't really have any leadership authority in my group. And I said, well, you could ask and see, pose the idea and see if people think it's a good one. And so he's like, okay, all right, I'll ask. And so he did. And guess what? Everybody thought it was a great idea. So then not only did he get all of the groups to do it, because everybody was looking for something to do, he was also able to reach out to alums that were in college, and he got some college a cappella groups to participate as well. And there was one student who actually also happened to be a former client of mine whom he knew, who also had a brother with special needs. And so it became this great way of bringing people together, particularly this was right around March, April of 2020. So it was a really good opportunity for him to bring people together during a difficult time. He was a talented musician, mostly self-taught. He started learning music because it was the only thing that would occupy his older brother. So when he was like 5 or 6 years old, he would drag the piano and started playing it. And that's how he got interested in music. Taught himself how to play the guitar, taught himself how to play the piano. And he got very involved in his a cappella group. Because of that, sort of taking that risk and saying, hey, could we do this concert a different way? He then became the musical director of his high school's a cappella group. And they have a varsity and a junior varsity. And he was the musical director for both groups. And then, of course, he had to pivot because, wait, we're not doing it together. We're not singing synchronously. They had to learn how to do asynchronously. And so he had to figure out how to record all of the different singers together and then make them blend in harmony so that they could put a video together. So he was really trying to learn lots of different ways of bringing together online music for a lot of different people. Then he also, because of that, his video, they went to the international semifinalist championships and they won, best in show. So that was the first time that the group had ever done it. So it was a really amazing thing for him when he did that. He also had a strong intellectual curiosity because of what he saw. It was music and anything to do with autism. That was really what he had space for. And he went really deep in those things. But he was interested in data analytics, and in particularly in seeing how his brother in his school would learn through taking data and figuring out how to apply that data into a different learning style. So he got interested in how to use data and analytics to apply it to different types of learning. So for our strategy for Arun, we wanted to identify schools with a strong data science and music program. He pivoted sophomore year. He was able to adapt to a virtual concert, and then that set the foundation for him adapting to virtual performing. He was also able to refocus his efforts at Help Autism India. Before, he was trying to raise money to give to schools, but when the schools closed down, he realized that he needed to help individual families, because he saw how difficult it was with his own family, because his brother wasn't in school anymore and everybody was working, everyone was trying to do stuff, and they needed a way to occupy them. And music and iPad was really the way that he did that. So he raised money to buy iPads for families in India with kids with autism, autistic kids, so that he could help them occupy them. And then he also really focused his application on the intersectionality. And that's something you'll hear a lot in schools, like, what's your intersectionality? What are the ways that your interests intersect? And that's what makes your unique angle. So for him, it was the intersectionality of music, data analytics, and his autistic brother. And that really informed his character and his motivation. And so that really became a clear part of his application. Everything was about that. And his strategy was to apply early decision to Cornell. This was his full list of schools as we go through this here. And he, drum roll, since we're getting late on time, he applied early to Cornell and he was accepted. So he withdrew all the rest of his applications. So that is our final case study. And now, if you guys have some questions, because I know we talked a lot, please let us know. And if you have to go, I totally understand. Do you have a better chance to get into your preferred school if you send in your application before the due date? No, there's no, well, let me preface that. If there's an actual due date, so as opposed to a rolling notification school or a rolling school, then there's no preference. You just, as long as you get it in by the date that it's due, they're not going to give you any preference for getting it in early. That's kind of a misnomer. There are some schools like Indiana, which is rolling notification. So if you get it in earlier, you'll find out earlier. Wake Forest lets you apply very early for early decision. You could apply as early as August 1st, but it's hard to get all the accompanying letters of recommendation and everything with it. But they'll let you know within a month. So that you get the benefit of knowing in a month and then you're done. Or if you don't get in, you can have another way to apply early decision somewhere else. But no, there isn't any advantage to getting it in earlier. How easy will it be for C-type students for colleges? C students do really well because the expectations, so we talked a lot about sort of the more highly select colleges, but if you looked at Sophie, I mean, she was applying to a lot of schools where a lot of C students would be able to get in. And I think it's really a matter of really targeting your list appropriately and making sure that you go apply to schools that have a high acceptance rate. And those schools are really looking for students. So our C students do really well because they target schools appropriately. Let's see, why were those schools considered a reach for Arun? Seemed like they would be possible. They were a reach for Arun based on the data from his high school. And so when you looked at the data from his high school, I really made them more like wildcard schools. They were schools that it's always unclear whether or not you're going to get into the school, even if you're admissible. If you remember back to Noah, I mean, he was admissible for a lot of those schools and he ended up getting waitlisted or deferred. And so that's why, based on the data that we were looking at the time, they were considered reach schools. Let's see, if a student gets accepted ED, what happens if she or she decides to go to another school? Well, if you get accepted, okay, so let's talk about the difference. So ED is a binding commitment. So if you're accepted ED, that means that you're applying with the expectation that you're going to go. That's the expectation. EA is early action. That is a non-binding application. So if you get accepted ED, then it's the expectation that you're going to go unless there's something that happens financially. But you can always do a pre-read on your financial aid by doing a net price calculator to determine what your financial aid is. And if they don't meet the financial aid that you were were told you were going to get, then that's a way to get out of ED. But otherwise, it's not in good form to apply ED to a school and then not go. It does hurt the high school, but that happens a lot.